in the very, very first draft, his character arc was that he was like kind of a weak president, and that he was kind of like people always called him spineless. And then Jeff and I had this thing that made us like cry laughing, where the end of his arc was ripping out like 10 robot spines and holding them in the air and screaming, "Who's spineless now?"
Welcome to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies. Each episode, a brilliant screenwriter revisits their initial screenplay for what became a beloved movie, discussing what changed, what didn't, and why, from first draft to the big screen. Today we're delighted to be joined by Rianda and Jeff Rowe, the writer-director duo behind one of this year's most riotously funny and inventive movies. In The Mitchells vs. the Machines, two terrible things happen to young filmmaker Katie Mitchell. First, her dad decides to surprise her by taking the entire family on a cross-country road trip on the eve of her going to college. And second, the tech apocalypse strikes, enslaving pretty much all of mankind. It's neck and neck as to which one is worse for Katie. Together it's up to the Mitchells to stop the robot uprising and save the world from destruction. Featuring groundbreaking animation, hilarious movie references, and Olivia Colman as an evil Alexa, The Mitchells vs. the Machines had everything. But as you'll discover in today's episode, the film almost went in a very different direction. Originally titled Control-Alt-Escape, the film's first draft had the Mitchells on a mission with the President of the United States. It had a drastically different ending and a reduced role for two of the movie's standout characters, the glitching robots Eric and Deborahbot 5000. In the conversation you're about to hear, we dig into all of those changes, as well as its chances of a sequel, and yes, that scene with the demonic Furby, which has haunted my nightmares ever since I saw this film. It's a spoiler-filled conversation, if you hadn't already guessed, so if you're yet to see The Mitchells vs. the Machines, head to Netflix right now, then come back as we delve into every detail of this incredible movie. Before we do that though, a quick reminder that Script Apart is now on Patreon. For the price of a single monthly cup of coffee, you can now support the show, have a say in upcoming episodes, submit your questions for upcoming guests, and get a free copy of our brand new digital magazine. To get involved, simply head over to patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, that's the housekeeping out the way. Let's get into it with the awesome Rianda and Jeff Rowe. A huge thanks to our Patreon supporters, that includes John Crozier and Jess Cranbrook. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Okay, in the words of a certain Furby, let the dark harvest begin. Jeff, Mike, welcome to Script Apart. Thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how much I love this film, and I can't begin to imagine what the last couple of months have been like for you guys, kind of witnessing the reaction to this movie, which seemed to strike at a really important time. How's it been for you guys, like witnessing the outpouring of love and affection that there's been for the Mitchells versus the Machines?
It's been incredible because, you know, we were working on this for, 6 years, which is embarrassing to say out loud. And, you know, I'm just so happy that people liked it because, you know, we liked it, you know, we were like, oh, this is great, you know, but you never know. And it's been really gratifying seeing, you know, people are getting Mitchells vs. Machines tattoos, which I wouldn't advise, but it's very touching, regardless. You know, if you've already gotten one, I love it. But yeah, no. So it's been really incredible. And it's also been incredible seeing, you know, that was our theory that like the love that we put into the movie would sort of come back to us, and it has worked shockingly, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Jeff, how about you? What's your experience been?
It was good. There was like, I mean, to Mike's point, like I don't know. I think it being like an original thing and not really knowing what it's like. We spent 5 years on this, and people would be like, "Oh, what do you do? What are you up to? What are you working on?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm directing a movie," and they're like, yeah, sure. Like what? Like what is it? What property is it? And we're like, it's the original thing, and it's nice to have a receipt for the time that we put in. But yeah, there was like a 2-3 week high where it's like everyone's like tweeting about it and being really nice, and the whole world's like engaging it. And now I'm just like back to work. But it was so exciting to see it take flight, to see it be liked by people.
Well, and Jeff was always like the optimist, where it's like, oh, people are going to love it. And I was always like, yeah, I was like curled up in a ball, sucking my thumb, saying that people are going to hate it. So I'm glad he was right.
Yeah. I'd be like, I think this is good. I think we're doing okay. I don't know.
What were your apprehensions, Mike? What were you worried about? Or is it just kind of when you're 4 or 5 years into a project, sort of self-doubt is always going to creep in?
Yeah. I mean, I think you just go bananas and also just, because it's like, it's sort of a cliche, but, you can see all the mistakes or all the areas that you sort of fell short and also places that, it's just like the things will the things that I think are funny make other people laugh, or will the things that make me cry make other people cry and all that stuff. So it's like, I just wasn't sure. So, and it's true. There's plenty of people who are like, this sucks, we hate it. So, I understand them. I understand their point of view as well, but I like it.
And those people are getting I hate Mitchell's versus the Machines tattoos.
Yes, exactly.
It's cool.
It's
okay.
Wild. I like my face with like the word hate written in blood on the forehead, which I would advise. That tattoo I think is great to get. Everyone should get.
So my grasp of the chronology of this movie is a little bit hazy. Did you guys have the film finished by the time the pandemic struck, or were you still working on it through lockdown? Because, well, for me, I certainly watched this beautiful movie about the importance of family at a time where I hadn't been able to see my family for the longest period of time, I think, in my entire life. I can't imagine what it would have been like to work on a movie with this message in a similar position of being apart from your loved ones.
Yeah, no, I mean, we start, but I will say we started so long ago. So it's like so this has been brewing for a while. And I think we had finished a big push right before the pandemic started. So that was really nice, but we still didn't stop working on the movie as the pandemic was going. We were finishing animation. We were making some editorial changes and tweaks and stuff. But I will say the movie was like kind of locked-ish by the time the pandemic started. And it's true. It was kind of wild that a movie that's sort of about a disaster where you have to hold tight to your loved ones, came out during a disaster where you have to hold tight to your loved ones. And also, this accidental ending we had, that was sort of like a Skype call sort of took on new meaning when the only time you could sort of contact your family is through Skype or whatever, or Zoom. I don't know. I hold no fealty to Skype.
Yeah, the film really does capture family life in a way that feels so authentic, like the love, the conflict, the dysfunction, the care. So many people, I think, saw themselves and their families in these characters during, well, yeah, as I said, a time where a lot of us have been experiencing this enforced separation. How do you think the context that this movie arrived in kind of, nuclear charged the message of Mitchell's versus the Machines?
I mean, to speak to the family element of it, like I think part of what people really respond to in the family is like we kind of started with like a mission to be like ultra specific with like the characters, like to be really realistic and observed. And Rick Mitchell is based very much on Mike's dad and all his and the initial draft of the script had probably too many of his like actual idiosyncrasies like in it, and like it was a little too realistic. And then it was just this like, I don't know. And I think the more specific you are, the more universal it becomes, because everyone knows a Rick Mitchell or sees that kind of person, and same thing with Katie and the rest of the family. So I think like being very honest about a family allowed it to connect to more families. Maybe.
I think that's true. I mean, it was sort of that, like, talk about your village and we'll talk about the world thing, because we were sort of trying to drill down into these characters and make them sort of, as true to our experiences as we could be. And it was nice to see people like, oh, did you take a, camcorder and film my family for the past 10 years? And even though Katie's an artist, like a lot of people were like, oh, I was a graphic designer and my dad didn't like it, or I was I didn't want to be a doctor and my parents freaked out, or whatever it is. I think there's always this sort of push and pull with kids and parents about sort of, their dreams versus what's realistic versus what's going to hurt them and stuff. And I do think that, like, especially during this time, at a time where you're really missing your family, those sort of little, that stuff kind of tends to fade away, like those little conflicts and stuff.
And as you touched on there, you guys were bringing parts of yourselves to this story. I know, Mike, that I think you mentioned elsewhere that you were a little brother whose siblings went off, and you experienced that vulnerable feeling that Aaron feels in the film. What are the other ways in which there are parts of yourselves in these characters?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Jeff was saying, sort of like, the dad is just my dad. My dad is I don't know if it made it into the script that we sent you guys, but like at one point I just literally wrote out my father, the character. His name was even Brian, and my dad's name is Brian. And then the very first draft that we never even showed anyone except a couple people at Sony, they were like, this man is a lunatic and no one will follow him. Like, this is too realistic. He's too, why are the mom and dad together? And it's like, even though my sort of whatever, it's like, so we sort of ended up sort of trying to sort of broaden it and make it a little bit more universal without losing some of that sort of bite. And then I think, like, me and Jeff were like obsessive little kids. And that's sort of where some of that Aaron stuff comes from. And Jeff still knows more about dinosaurs than I ever will.
I like facts. I like holding on to obscure information.
Can't say fairer than that. So in terms of that specificity and the authenticity of these characters, were there kind of other cinematic touchstones for you guys? I mean, like the dysfunction of the Mitchells, like the love between the characters that's more important than the dysfunction. That reminded me a lot of like early Simpsons. Were there other kind of on-screen families for you guys that you wanted to emulate?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both grew up with The Simpsons so much to the point where it's like in our DNA. So that's like definitely one. But we always had like big, heady film school influences for the movie. Like there was always like, Jeff would always write like a swirling Boogie Night style tracking shot, or whatever. And like, that sort of stuff where we would be sort of like reaching as high as we could, it's like, we're just like these little kids who are like, maybe we could get, maybe we can make movies as good as our heroes. So it was, so a lot of it was sort of like, a lot of that like Katie cinephile stuff was just sort of like us growing up. We were like little pretentious film jerks who were trying to sort of be cooler than we are.
Yeah.
How about for you, Jeff? Any film history families that you kind of wanted to bring a touch of?
I mean, there were things that we looked at. Little Miss Sunshine would come into the conversation and like, oh yeah, that's like a good depiction, like good honest depiction of a family. We looked at a lot with like buddy cop comedies and that for the relationship with Rick and Katie, just from like a story structure. Like, how does this work? How does cinema handle two characters that are opposites and don't get along? Looking at everything from like Lethal Weapon to Zootopia, which accomplishes it wonderfully.
Yeah, we were always really ashamed, but we're like, don't let anyone know, but we did just watch Lethal Weapon and we learned some stuff over the weekend. So we're going to do some tweaks to the story.
Mike, I've heard you tell a great story before about how the film essentially began with Sony asking if you had any movie ideas and you being like, do I? Of course I do. I'll be right back. And then you raced home. You raced actually back to your hometown, right? And sort of frantically started to sort of try and come up with ideas. Can you tell me about that experience and perhaps what some of the ideas were before you landed on?
Oh, sure. I can tell you all kinds of ideas. No, because they sort of like asked, and it was at a weird part of my, like, I was working on this short and I wasn't even thinking about making any movies. So I weirdly had a lot of confidence in the meeting. I was like, what do you got? You know, and they're like, this guy knows what he's talking about. He doesn't even care if he gets a movie or not, which like I think helped. But then when I saw the opportunity, I like turned on a tape recorder and I was like, I came up with like 10 ideas and I was like, these are all gold. And then I actually sent them to my friends, Jeff and Alex. And one of them was like, it was like, okay, a kid learns that Santa's not real, but he knows that all the other kids think Santa's real. So he's got to become Santa for the other kids. It's called Secret Santa. Great. That's one in the bank. Next. And then like, I was like, look, I've got like 50 good ideas. And Jeff's like, Secret Santa is not good. That's not a good idea.
By the way, Netflix just bought Secret Santa. It's coming to theaters this Christmas.
Yeah, we optioned it. It's starring Seth Rogen. But no, but it was really exciting. Just the idea that like Sony was in such a weird position that they were like, look, we're just looking for any new ideas. So it was like, wow, we have this like blank canvas to make a movie, and like, what's a movie that we would love that we could actually get made at a studio? And I thought it would be really easy. I remember thinking like, oh, family and a road trip and robots like this, they'll sell this, bing, bang, boom. It's going to be a slam dunk. And then like 4 years later, like they're like, you're greenlit after like 4 years of like intense work, just proving ourselves, like, you know, making animatics and doing rewrites and all this stuff. And, you know, making the script that we sent to you, it was sort of like it was like a long process to actually get greenlit. And one of the big things that did it was we showed the movie in sort of animatic form, which is like, you know, temporary voices and drawings instead of 3D renderings for all the imagery. And we showed it to a group of people in Long Beach, and they liked it. So it was like, well, people like it maybe. And then Chris Miller and Phil Lord saw it, and which was like, to me, like enough for us. I was like, they saw it. That's cool. And they liked it. And then they're like, do you want us to executive produce your movie? And we're like, yeah, bro, dude, of course. What are you high? And then that was really nice because they sort of, it gave us a layer of legitimacy, which we clearly don't have based on everything we've said on this podcast so far. And we had these guys who were like, we've made hit movies and we think these guys are okay. And they're like, do you really? But that was sort of like some of the genesis of it.
Yeah. And how did you actually land on the seed of the idea for Mitchells versus the Machines after Secret Santa had been discarded? R.I.P. Secret Santa. How did you end up with this idea?
It was just sort of like, I was just kind of like trying. There's this like George Saunders like has this thing where it's like a lot of people say, write what you know. And George Saunders is this writer, and he's like, write from an area of richness. And one of my sort of like areas of richness is like my family, because I like love them more than anything, but they're also insane. So I wanted to do something about my family. And then sort of the fact that my dad is this sort of like nature loving technophobe guy, like it was funny to me imagining him having to fight robots. And then I was like, well, also, you know, I was reading a lot about AI and technology, and I was like, oh, it seems like you could really, you know, it's like if robots can do and AI can do what people can do, what about humans is really valuable? And that was like a big, nice, thematic, juicy thing. So that seemed really good. And then also sort of when I started talking about that idea and myself to a tape recorder, it just sort of like the ideas, it became really easy to come up with ideas for, and it sort of started building on itself. And I also sent my, you know, 5 or 6, I actually have an email where I sent all these ideas to Jeff, and he's like, oh, I like this one the best. So Jeff picked it, basically.
Yeah.
Well done, Jeff. You really pulled through, man.
I know how to pick winners. That's
but what did, I mean, it seems so obvious now, like, you know, it's the worst equipped family and they're tasked with stopping the robot apocalypse. But back then, what was it about that germ of the idea that leapt out at you, Jeff?
Well, it's interesting because like what you just said, like the worst equipped family stopping the robot apocalypse, like I don't think that became like clarified and like crystallized in the movie until later in the game. Like you had always pitched it like that, Mike. Like, what if your insane family had to stop the apocalypse? But it's like that, like really showcasing their inability to do it and the impossibility of it, like kind of came later. But I think it's just like Mike and I are good friends, and I've met his family, and I've seen the ancestral Rianda home up in Salinas, California. And it's like, I know the stories that he's told about his family, and I'm just like, oh, this is about your family. Like, this is a rich area. Like, the characters are specific, and that's like step one. Like, if you can write the characters, like then you've got something.
And if you can have characters that we can both fall in love with, because I remember sort of like I hired Jeff because I was sort of bouncing off the walls, losing my marbles trying to write it alone. And then they're like, why don't you get a co-writer? And then I was like, oh, I know the best writer I know. And it was really great seeing him write the characters, like from day one. Like, he knew them really well, so they like jumped right off the page immediately, and we sort of knew that if the characters were lovable, that's like you're 90% of the way there. If they're clear and lovable and specific, because that's sometimes people are like, this character's lovable because he gives a homeless man a donut, or whatever, and it's like, or he saves a cat from a tree. Sorry, I'm saying it's such a mocking word. But it's sort of like, but it's like ideally, even if they did something wrong or if they made the wrong choice, you would also like them and you would just follow them because sort of the force of their personality. I think immediately from the jump, we both were sort of able to sort of like his like first thing he ever wrote for Katie was this like insane Terminator riff called Robo Slayer Beldocken. And I was like, oh, well, this guy, we're going to write the greatest movie of all time. Just because we shared a lot of the same like reference points. And we just also made each other laugh to a point in which I'm certain everyone else on the crew hated us. Like, just us like cackling, like, jackals at our own jokes, and just everyone else with their head in their hands like, these idiots.
We had multiple people change offices nearby us because they just didn't want to be around the
there was too much mirth.
It is worth noting at this point that the draft we're going to talk about today isn't called The Mitchells versus the Machines, nor does it have the other title that was attached to the movie at one point, Connected. This draft is called Control Alt Escape.
Yes.
Yeah. So, walk me through the history of this movie's various titles, guys. Like, where this initial title came from and how you ended up with The Mitchells versus the Machines instead.
Well, really quick. The first title ever was like, it was like the Davis family it was like the Mitchell family versus the robot apocalypse, which is like very wordy and stupid, which is what I loved. I was like, I want it to be wordy and annoyingly long. And then the studio was like, this is a nightmare. So Jeff is like the best person I know at titling things. So he just sent a list of 20 great titles. And one of them was like, oh, Control Alt Escape. And I was like, all right, I don't know, maybe that one. And then that one stuck, and I was like, is that good?
Everybody loved it, by the way. Like, everyone who isn't Mike was like, that's a great title. Tom Rockman's like, I like this title. Like, it was very well received.
It was.
Continue, Mike.
No, but it was, and I was like, I like the old title. Tom Rothman is the head of Sony, and he's this sort of like very old school, like, movie executive who's like, I don't know, kid, I don't know about any of this. But he's like, I'll tell you one thing, that's a killer title. All right, I gotta go. He's like, he doesn't have a cigar, but there's like kind of like there should be one in his mouth. But yeah, he complimented the title, and I was like, we'll have that title forever. And then it actually is a good title, but then ultimately I think it was like just the fact that kids, I asked my nephew, I was like, do you know what Control Alt Escape is? And he's like, no, I have no idea. What are you talking about? You're old and I hate you. And then so I tried to go back to the original and shorten it, and I was happy about that. But then Sony was like, it's got to be like a one-word title, like an elegant Pixar-esque title. And then they went with Connected, which I was always sort of like on the fence about, because I understand it's like good thematically, but I just think if I was a kid, I wouldn't be that interested in it, you know? And the Mitchell vs. Machine sounded more exciting to me personally. And then ultimately when Netflix bought it, they were like, hey, we like the old title. It's like, we like the old title. Great. You know, and I just in case, I prepared like this insanely long PowerPoint listing the 198 tweets of people who are like, I hate Connected. It sucks. But you know, anyway.
It all worked out in the end.
Yeah, it worked out in the end.
What's so interesting about this draft is I think the bones of the story feel in place, give or take a few things and a few characters that we'll get to in a moment. It feels like, you know, you had the tone, you had the hilarity, and you had a lot of the excitement of the finished film down at this point. But what you really worked hard to underline and intensify in subsequent drafts was like the emotional aspect of this story. So for example, you know, we start the film in a pretty similar way, throwing the audience into the deep end during a frantic robot car chase as in the finished film. Yeah. And then we throw back a couple of days to the night before Katie leaves for college. We get to meet all the characters and we get a little bit of a lens into their heads during this like dinner table sequence. Katie and Rick argue, but the scene doesn't end as it does in the film with the heartbreak of Rick accidentally breaking Katie's laptop. So I'd love to hear where that addition to the scene came from and whether or not it feels like development of that scene and the addition of like the laptop breaking is kind of emblematic of a lot of the work that you had to do to the draft to really make the character dynamics sing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that one came out of pure sort of, I don't know, panic, I would say maybe, because we had the story, like we felt okay about the script. Because like our goal always was like this like very lofty, like greatest animated movie of all time. And we knew we weren't probably going to like beat Miyazaki and, Pixar or whatever, but like we could maybe, you know, by trying we'd get close or whatever. So we were always like trying to sort of like, okay, we weren't satisfied with the script, but we have to board something. So we had the storyboard artist work on it and they always added a bunch of awesome stuff to it. And then we tried to watch it as soon as possible. Like how can we get to the quickest point where we could watch it like viewers and judge it, not as creators, but as somebody taking an input. And Jeff would always do this thing that I always love, which is like before we watched the movie, he would pull up movie trailers. So you'd put yourself in the mindset of like, okay, I'm sitting in a movie theater. I just saw a trailer for the Lorax or something. And now here comes the movie that we're going to watch. So we could try to watch it as viewers. And the draft that you watched, we watched together and we're like, man, I don't care. You know, I just don't like, I there's funny jokes and I like these characters and whatever, but I don't care about the story. And that was like a huge red alert. So we had this big story meeting and we were just trying to think of something that felt, because you just didn't believe that Katie, that there were no stakes. Like you didn't believe, you're like, whatever, Katie wants to meet people, who cares? Rick wants her to stay around. She's going to stay around. It's going to be fine. But we needed to have something that was like, felt like a gut punch to the audience. And then we had this story meeting with the story artist and Jeff and stuff. And I think we as a group kind of came up with like, okay, it needs to be something that legitimately makes the audience think that Katie might leave home forever. And what could potentially do that? What are the things she loves? What if this laptop of hers gets broken? And then I think Jeff sort of smartly like wrote that scene. I remember you telling me, Jeff, where it's like, oh, the scene needs to have a goal. Because he is sort of smarter than me and also watched the Aaron Sorkin masterclass. And so sort of we wrote it to this goal of like, oh, Katie's goal in this scene is to get approval from her parents to try to show them this video, and that it goes wrong in like the worst way possible. So that was kind of, and yeah,
the scene kind of came about or became about like her trying to get her dad before she leaves to just engage with what she likes, and Rick kind of trying to, in a kind of ill-advised attempt, like crack down on his family's computer use and cell phone use, and it was always about him like making this like grand point about technology, which always felt like you just, it's like he stops being the character and you just hear the writer like talking through them and saying like technology is bad, and it just felt like very unnatural. But like him trying to like, when it became about him trying to like express to his daughter that he's concerned about her and that he doesn't think he'll make it, both became like more realistic and observed and more like conversations I think we've had with our parents, and just more, it also like softened him, because it's like he was coming from a good place. Like, even though it was like, oh, I don't like it, it's like I get where he's coming from, and I can relate to, I can kind of do the math and get it. But yeah. And the laptop was just the thing that made it clear. It was like a visual thing that you could like hang a hat on and be like, okay, this is what happened. This is what went wrong.
Yeah. And I think that was a lot of like, the draft you read is like very talky. And we were trying to work with the storyboarders too, to sort of like, how can we make any of these points visual and visceral, as opposed to just like a conversation between two people. And then sort of, you know, one of the things about making the movie more emotional that we sort of started a little bit, but I think Chris and Phil were really helpful. Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who executive produced the movie, were really helpful and instrumental, and was like just kind of policing us and making sure that like, okay, are the characters always trying to connect? And when you see, because it's like, I do think people want to get along with their families. I don't think anyone's like, I'm glad I hate my dad. You know what I mean? Like you're like, we're supposed to love each other. What's going on? So when it is people trying to reach out, like, I want you to watch this movie, and Rick saying, I want you to listen to me and I want to get closer to you, then it kind of became more compelling too. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
It's fascinating, but I'm interested. Like, obviously, the one of the wedges sort of between Rick and Katie is technology. How hard was it getting the balance right in terms of attitudes towards technology in this movie? Because, well, in the finished product, as an audience member, you're totally able to sympathize with Rick and his frustration towards technology, but you also totally buy into Katie's point of view. The internet has been this creatively liberating tool for her that's part of how she expresses herself. She thinks it's how she's going to find her people. How did you thread that needle between the two? Because it's easy to imagine a film like this in other hands becoming a bit like old man yells at cloud kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
go for it, Jeff.
I was just going to say, like, I think it was kind of, it's like technology kind of became this like vague catch-all for us, where it's like, what does that mean? Does that mean like machines in general? Like old mechanical camera is technology? Like, does it mean social media? And I think there's like legitimate complaints about technology and what like social media is like doing to the world and stuff. But it was like, we kind of had to, I don't know, Rick's character needed to be like anti anything with like an electric current or something. Like what would like, it was hard to like specify what that was and why and where that came from for him as a character. And I think it was just about connection. And I don't know, Mike.
Well, I mean, I noticed that when we were writing, I remember like, because the first thing you would think of if you were writing a movie like this is, oh yeah, well, the dad would hate technology and he would be railing against it and whatever. Because my dad kind of hates technology. I mean, he uses it, but he's like, like, so he always like, he'll like minimize a window and be like, I got hacked. But so it's like, but I think whenever the characters would monologue about technology as a concept, the script died. Like, it was like you hated the characters, you hated the filmmakers. You were like, this movie is terrible. So we had to sort of come up with sort of ways that they engage with it. Because like, you never hear Katie saying, because in previous drafts, we had Katie saying like, technology is great. I talk to my friends online. I make movies online. And it was just like, you wanted to kill yourself when you read that. And whereas if you just see her making movies online and see her connecting with her friends and visually see the emotional charge that she gets out of it, she doesn't need to say anything. Just like Rick doesn't really need to sort of rant about cell phones. He just needs to like say, oh, put your phones down. Let's make eye contact with each other, which is a more engaging and also visual way of showing his sort of distaste for these things. And it really ended up being just like, we couldn't verbally address technology at all, because every time we did, we would just bore ourselves, because we were like the hardest critics of our own script. Like, it was so funny. Like, the studio would have notes and we're like, you've got notes, I've got notes, page 1, I hated this line. And they're like, whoa, kid, calm down. So like that made it and just like being really trying to sort of always see it like sort of when Jeff would put on the trailers and stuff, trying to always watch it, even if we're reading it, like a viewer, and be really honest with ourselves about what we were feeling about the characters and the movie and the script and that sort of thing, sort of negated almost any actual conversation about is technology good or bad, because it just was poison.
Well, in the next few pages, we're introduced to the tech whiz who's responsible for PAL, the AI system that is going to attempt to enslave humanity later in the film. In the finished film, this guy's name is Mark Bowman. In this version, his name is Mark Zuckerkorn. I'm guessing that changed. I'm guessing that changed because you're not a fan of cease and desist letters.
Yes. Also, it's a very dumb name.
Yeah, I just thought it was a dumb name. I just hated it. Every time I would type it, I would just scowl in my heart. I'm like, why is this character called this? I hate this so much.
And also, I would say, the final name just came from a list of somebody saying, like, me just being like, asking the crew, like, come up with last names. I don't know. And then I just sort of randomly picked one that felt, innocuous or something. But I actually think that his last name, even though Zuckerkorn is wrong, his current last name Bowman is like so unmemorable and means nothing that it's sort of a shitty last name too. So I don't think we nailed that one.
But Pal in this version has a pretty similar role, but again, it feels like you worked really hard to embellish and bring out the emotional side of the character. I mean, yes, they're an AI, but by the time you get to the finished film, you've put in that scene where you find out that this whole quest that she goes on is kind of rooted in insecurity and pain. She's an AI, but she's pretty human. Can you tell me about the evolution of Pal?
Yeah, I mean, the Pal was definitely one of the hardest characters to write, because we always, again, we started with the sort of like the first idea, which is like, oh, okay, Pal is super intelligent and is going to be sort of like monologuing about how horrible humanity is and that sort of thing. And it's so funny because like people just tuned out, in the movie, and especially because I was the temp voice of Pal and it was like a male voice and it wasn't like Olivia Colman, which like it helps when you have the greatest actor of your generation be the voice of your villain. But it's sort of like this was a big sort of thing that we had with the meeting when we were in the edit bay with Chris Miller and Phil Lord and us, and we were like trying to brainstorm ways that story could also be emotional and how that story could sort of more mirror, because I bet in the version you read, the tech story and the human story are like wildly different.
Yeah.
And there's no thread connecting them. And we were trying to sort of say that, okay, what if, Katie is leaving Rick? What if Mark is leaving Pal, and Pal and Rick have that connection of being left behind and feeling insecure and obsolete? Maybe there's a thematic connection there. And even though we never sort of make it that explicit over the course of the movie, ideally it sort of makes the movie feel a little bit more cohesive and also the other thing we learned that is just, if something isn't emotional, if a story point isn't emotional, it's sort of dead. If it's just intellectual, if it's just characters talking, it's sort of, we tuned out and the audience is watching it tuned out.
Yeah, it's like hard to watch someone who's motivated by an ideal or something.
Yes.
It's like, it's so much easier to relate when it's like something personal, or even if they are motivated by an ideal, like what does that ideal mean to them personally? It's like articulating like the personal stakes of something.
Exactly.
In my house, just full disclosure, since watching this film, when something goes catastrophically wrong, the byword for it is now, Prancer belongs to the canyon now. We should take a second to talk about the humor of the film. It's such a hilarious movie. I can tell how overflowing with comic ideas you guys were for the film, because there's some incredible jokes that you ended up cutting. There's one gag about how to attack a beaver and why you would want to attack a beaver that absolutely cracked me up.
I forgot about that.
How hard was it whittling down what to keep in and what to sacrifice to keep the story moving?
I'll sort of talk about that a little and then sort of like let Jeff take it away, because like, Prancer belongs to Canyon now was a Jeff line, because if we were at a party and we would lose someone for 5 minutes, he'd be like, Justin belongs to the night now. Just keep moving. And like, there's like 100 jokes in the movie that has so-and-so belongs to the so-and-so now. But that was the one we ended up leaving in. So some of it is just stuff that we love. I mean, I think, because we grew up with The Simpsons and because we wrote on Gravity Falls, I think we kind of almost have like joke ADD, where anytime we write a scene, it's like, okay, it's got to have at least 5 or 6 jokes to kind of, to be able to read it out loud and be proud of it or something, which I don't know if that's healthy. But then my strategy for the jokes was just to keep all of them. And then Jeff's strategy for the jokes was to like only keep the funny ones, which I disagree with and think is a terrible plan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, like writing jokes is almost like an insecurity or something, where it's like it's hard to know if an audience likes a dry line, but a joke becomes binary. Either someone laughs or they don't, and it's like a great way to know if the screenplay is doing its job or not. So it's like, I don't know what to do. Just put a joke in. I don't know what they should be talking about. Just make it a joke. And then I think for me, Josh Weinstein, who was a showrunner on The Simpsons for a while and we worked with on Gravity Falls, said this thing once about like load-bearing jokes, where it's just like a joke that like isn't just funny, but also reveals something about the character or moves a plot point forward and is supports the narrative. And for me, it was always like, how do we either cut the joke or make it like a load-bearing joke? Like, I think there's like an allowance for things that are just funny, just because they're funny and entertaining. But otherwise, you generally always want to be moving the story forward. And I think that was like one of the biggest like contrasts between me and Mike working on the film. Is like I would overcut and Mike would tend to undercut.
We called Jeff Dr. Snips. It would be like his version of the scene would be like, 2 minutes shorter and play better. But I'm like, my favorite 2 jokes were cut. And then I would always add back the jokes. And he's like, well, you added the time back. And I'm like, sorry. But another thing just about the comedy of the movie is like, that was honestly like one of the reasons to make the movie for us was just because, we just wanted to make an animated movie that was like super like laugh out loud, legitimately funny, because there are a lot of great animated comedies, but sometimes you'll watch an animated movie and you're like, there was like 3 jokes in that and none of them made me laugh or whatever. So we're like, well, if our movie is really funny, that is something that we can, that's something like different, hopefully. And so we had this thing on the wall and it was like, we needed to have 50 legitimate, reliable laughs that like, if we showed the movie to a new person, they would hopefully laugh 50 times or more, which is very lofty. And I don't know if we got it, but that was always our like goal. We had all these like little goals like that to try to kind of keep ourselves honest about like what we were going for.
Now, 2 big changes from the finished film in this draft. Well, first of all, the Mitchells encounter the President of the United States, who ends up coming with them on their road trip. He's on a mission to deliver this EMP device that will disable power and all the robots. And it's the Mitchells' job to help him. I'm interested to know why this character was a part of the film initially, and whether or not he came out because, well, take your pick, A, 2016, people's perception of a US president may have slightly changed, or B, whether, like, I don't know, like it seems kind of so much more dramatically satisfying to have the Mitchells having to save the world themselves rather than being kind of assistants to this charismatic kickboxing president character. Was it an amalgamation of the both?
I want to address two things really quick. One is in the very, very first draft, the one that we never showed anyone, including you. I just want to highlight one thing was that his character arc was that he was like kind of a weak president, and that he was kind of like people always called him spineless. And then Jeff and I had this thing that made us like cry laughing, where the end of his arc was ripping out like 10 robot spines and holding them in the air and screaming, "Who's spineless now?"
I was going to say that's still in here, or yeah. But without the setup, so it just seems like it's taken on this really brutal turn. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I've interrupted, Mike.
No, totally. I mean, because that makes sense with the movie. But I remember at one point, like I was like, Jeff, we have to take out the spineless thing. He's like, the spineless thing is hilarious. We have to leave it in. Because I was like worried about the executives, like, they're gonna think it's too R-rated. But I had always sort of been really excited. I just thought it was really funny, the idea. I would just like imagine in my head my dad trying to kidnap the president of the United States. And it seemed really funny to me. And I was holding on to it. And I remember Jeff and I were working on the script, and at various points, and I was like, that's one of the reasons to make the movie. To me, it was like, I was like, oh, this is so funny. It's one of the reasons to make the movie. And then Jeff in the sort of writing phase is like, why do we have this president in here? It's slowing down the movie. The dumb robots are funnier anyway. Like, what are we doing? And I'm like, we have to keep the president. This is madness. And then we storyboarded it. And that scene, even though the scene with the kidnapping the president, it's not like the one that you read, but it was really well boarded. It was like, well done. It should have got laughs, and it was dead silence. And I was like, Jeff, you were right. Like I admit everything. And then also note, in addition to that, it was like the 2016 election happened like, I don't know, 12 days after we decided to cut that. And it was just like politics got like less funny and fun. So those were some of the reasons.
But it worked out so well because it did give you space to incorporate the two dumb robots, Eric and Deborahbot, who don't really have a role in this draft. They're sort of in it in a kind of almost like a cameo sense.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, they're such fun characters. We have to talk about the mall scene, the Furby. I cannot remember the last time I laughed so hard at a film. But God, yeah, this whole scene just absolutely crushed me. I'd love to know what the reaction was when you presented the idea to Sony, when you told them that you wanted the big set piece in the film to involve an inexplicably oversized, forgotten toy of the 90s that screams lines like, "I will avenge my fallen children." Were they just like, okay, cool, yeah, sounds good? Or was there any pushback? It's like, Jim, do you remember the first time we saw that? Because like the first time we saw it boarded, we were like losing our minds laughing. And the first time we saw it edited, we were like, is this the funniest scene of all time? And then I remembered do you remember when we showed Mike Moon? And Mike Moon was one of the executives on the movie, who was really great and sort of like championed the movie getting made. And everybody at Sony, like, to your point of like, Sony was like very cool about the whole movie. Like they were on board. They thought it was funny. They liked us. They were like, this tone is really consistent and fun, and like it's legitimately funny and it's moving and all that stuff. So they were always on board. But the first time we showed them this scene, it was like, I was like,
I noticed people aren't laughing hysterically. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Are you guys sick? What's happening? It wasn't an initial hit. And also I would say like the version that you read, like, the version that you read also has a bunch of other dark toys, which we sort of like thought were really funny. There was a character called Collecting Carl that was there to collect your bones that we really liked. But it was also sort of like those jokes were kind of redundant because it was like a dark toy. There's like 55 dark toy jokes that made us laugh really hard, but we realized that we needed to kill the first, half of them to make the Furbies actually like shine, because it was just the same joke over and over.
And can you tell me about constructing the final act? Because in the draft, Katie electrifies herself in order to deliver this kill code into the back of Pal. The president's been captured. It's up to Katie. She seems to sacrifice herself for the family. Obviously, in the finished film, you went a different way. Can you tell me about the evolution of this ending?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of hit it off to Jeff, because Jeff is sort of like some sort of amazing savant, wrote the version that you see like in 2 hours, like wrote a new final act because I think the main goal was we're just trying to do more cross-cutting and make the act more exciting instead of having it be linear, because it was really long, right?
Yeah, it was very clunky, and there were like it was like doing the Return of the King thing, where it's like it would end and then something would happen, and then it would end and then something would happen, and it just like kept going up and down and stopping and starting, and it's like, even though it was a little bit too long, but it felt like an hour too long because of the shifting momentum, and we're like, how do we just like have? I think we had part of it was like, you had listened to that like Michael Arndt thing about like Star Wars and how like everything switches at like the same time. And we're like, oh yeah, how do we have like all of these threads turn at the same time? And starting from there, we're like, okay, so this has to go this. We talked it out. We kind of plotted it on a whiteboard. And then I went off and wrote it with the general rhythm that it has now. And like, a bunch of lines updated and changed, and the jokes got better and stuff. But that like cut to this came out of that like first crack at it. But like Katie sacrificing herself, it also kind of like thematically didn't work, because it's like that's like telling a story of like, I didn't appreciate my family and now I appreciate my family and I'm going to sacrifice myself for them. And we're like, I think we ultimately got to a place where we're like, oh, that's kind of not the movie. Like that's the Rick is right version of the movie. And we need to also honor Katie and, have him sacrifice too, and have them all work together. And it kind of became about the family, all appreciating each other and everybody being sorry about something. Instead of just this, like, I was wrong, Dad. You were right. Thanks for giving up your cabin for me, which seemed kind of hollow thematically.
Yeah. Well, and I remember one of our friends, actually, it was Dana Terrace, who is a wonderful board artist and helped us out in the beginning and runs a great show on the Disney Channel, was like, this is like, I don't know, like boomer dad, some sort of boomer dad fantasy. This sucks. And I was like, that like haunted me. I was like, so we were, that was another thing too. We're really trying to make sure that you really knew that this was like a double arc where Rick is learning and Katie is learning simultaneously. And it's not just, the message of the movie isn't respect your parents, which is a lame message. And it's like, I would feel like a dummy working 6 years on that. And even though the theme is sort of spelled out almost cartoonishly clearly, I'll take that over, over the movie being respect your parents, the movie, which is not what we're trying to do.
So the film ends on the same message in this draft, the same realization for Katie. Rick says, "Hey, Katie, good luck finding your people," as he drops her off at film school. Katie replies, "Dad, come on, you guys are my people." It's a really nice, it's a beautiful message. Can you tell me what you wanted to express about the importance of family with that ending and with, Katie's arc wrapping up like that?
Yeah, and just to the point we were just talking about, it was sort of like I had always had this sort of thought that I could never sort of express in the movie of just that, like, families are hard work, and that the way that your family will get better is not just starting to appreciate your parents, but actually, calling your mom and, sort of, if you're a dad, saying like, oh, what are you working on, honey? And sort of like actively taking steps to sort of unite as a family. And we sort of added threads in Act 2 where, Linda's holding up the sign to sort of make Rick try, and Aaron's holding up the sign to make Katie try. And it's like, oh, if you make these efforts and if you put out these olive branches, you will become stronger as a family. And that's one of the best things you can do in life. So yeah. And Katie says this in a cartoonishly bald, monologue. But hopefully we, used enough flashbacks to do it. And also, after she says this big speech, Guillermo Martinez, who was our head of story, who was brilliant and a bunch of really funny jokes sort of in storyboard form and sometimes in typewriter form. Like he's like, if there's any credit given to this movie being like funny or, good or whatever, he deserves a ton of the credit for that. But he was like, oh, you should have Pal be asleep and talk about how boring this monologue was. And that was the thing that like actually saved the monologue from being totally unusable was that Pal was calling out what the audience might be thinking. So that was sort of the thought in terms of the theme and stuff.
Well, and to that, you guys are my people thing, like just to speak about you and your dad, Mike, like I remember you talked about this in meetings and stuff where it's like, like there were times where you and your dad were just like the complete opposite people, but there's also like weird things that you share and stuff that you like learned from him and his like kind of wide-eyed, like, I'm going to get this thing done, even though nobody else believes in it or thinks that it's crazy. Like there's something about that where it's like, whatever your relationship is with your family, like you are part of that. You carry part of that with you. Like they become part of you, and what you like about yourself is in some way owed to them,
There's a beautiful grace note just at the end where we see Katie is in a same-sex relationship. And I don't know, for the longest time, people have made these attempts in animations and in sort of family films and whatever else to kind of like diversify the types of people and types of relationships you see. It just seems like it's put in such a normalized way, in such a natural way. I'd love to know about how that came about and sort of what the discussions were around potentially sort of wanting to show this is a film about family, but families don't always look the same. It seems to be a slight hint towards that.
Well, and we were always trying to sort of like be observational in terms of the writing and stuff. So when we were doing the writing, like Katie reminded us, me and Jeff, of some people that we went to school with that were LGBTQ plus and sort of like some friends and family members that we love, and we were talking about it with the crew, and we have crew that are LGBTQ plus. And they were like, and we were, because we don't know, because we were a sort of straight, idiot white dudes. And we're like, is this okay for us? Like, should we? And they were like, no, do it. Like, they were like, just go. Like, and one of us, or one of our artists, Lizzie Nichols, who is wonderful. She's a great designer and stuff, but she wrote this like really like wonderful email, just sort of like expressing to what it would mean to her, to have a character that she's working on be LGBT. And it was like so moving. It was like, oh my God, we have to do this. And then it sort of just became, because it was sort of an idea like, oh, maybe we do it. And then after like hearing how excited everyone was about it, we're like, well, now we have to do it. And now we have to kind of do it right, or try to do it right. So we worked with them a lot, and sort of, we did a lot of workshopping, and sometimes we'd go too far where like, there was a couple of scenes, there was one joke that sort of, I'm not sure which one of us wrote, but I thought was really funny, where it's like, Katie's about to die in the gas station, and she's like, oh, I'm going to die and I've never kissed a girl yet. And then someone next to her is like, ugh. And she's like, it's the end of the world, dude. You really have time to be homophobic right now? But stuff like that ended up being sort of like more distracting and less normalizing, you know? And sort of like an Abbi who did the voices is bi. And they sort of helped us along and say like, no, the cool thing about it is that you're not making a big deal about it. Like that's what would be meaningful about it, instead of, you know, because you guys clearly don't have the bona fides to tell the coming out story or anything. And then they're also like, and plus we've seen that a bunch. It's like, it's more exciting just to see a character be casually, you know, like her eyes are, you know, brown. She's also likes girls, you know, so that's sort of like how we ended up doing it, I guess.
And the big question, guys, obviously there's a fun frame in the film where you can see some of Katie's pitches for a second movie. What is the latest with talks about a sequel? Have you guys begun down that path with Sony yet?
My official stance is that I'm tired. I left that list of names and I'm like, hey guys, if you guys want to make one, go for it. I'm sleepy. But you know, I think it's like the cool thing about the name is that it gives you license to sort of try new things. But personally, I sort of am taking a little break.
Yeah. Well, you've got Secret Santa to finish up.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I'm looking forward to having both you guys on in December for that. Guys,
it's going to be terrible.
Mike, Dr. Snips, this has been so much fun. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I absolutely adore this movie, and I can't wait to see what comes next from you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.